When I wrote the book, The Entrepreneurial Engineer, I had a chapter called The Joy of Engineering, and a number of people commented that it was fairly unusual to use the term joy and engineering in the same phrase or sentence. But I guess I'd like to be clear. I'm an unapologetic and enthusiastic engineering chauvinist. I think engineering is a great education and a great profession. And in a certain sense, it's a license to do three things. It's a license to think about almost anything. It's a license to do and change the world for the better. And it's a license to organize and be organized. And so, in this micro lecture, let's briefly explore this notion of the joy of engineering by thinking about three sages, Dilbert, Francis Bacon, and Alfred Chandler. Let's start with Dilbert. So sometimes, maybe some of your friends in the liberal arts view an engineering education as overly narrow and technically specialized. But I don't think they're thinking very carefully about how the nature of knowledge has changed over the last century or two. In the 21st century, is it possible to be an educated person if you avoid science, if you avoid mathematics, if you avoid computers? And engineering builds on a broad base across a spectrum of human endeavor, concentrating on those technical matters, but it also builds on what we were calling the missing basics last time. And so engineering can be thought of as a liberal art for the 21st century, especially if we equip our young engineers with the missing basics. Perhaps the Dilbert cartoon shown here is closer to the truth, in which a sordid-looking figure is complaining to Dogbert, "I'm a technology left behind. I don't know how to use a computer, cell phone, PDA, digital camera, iPod, or TiVo." And Dogbert says, "Well, I guess I'd recommend a life of crime, but you aren't qualified." And without tech in the 21st century, it's true, you're not even qualified to be a criminal. So we can take pride in being engineers, and we can take pride in engineering as a marvelous education and profession, and yet engineering gets wedged between science and business in an interesting way. Scientists sometimes say that engineering is merely applied science. Businessmen sometimes say engineers are just technicians to do the bidding of capitalists. What we'd like to look at here is to examine two things that suggest that both of these views are historically inaccurate. Let's start with Sir Francis Bacon, the so-called father of science. Bacon exposed science's little secret in his book, The New Organon, in which he said, "Observe also that if sciences of this kind had any life in them, that could never have come to pass, which has been the case now for many ages, that they stand almost at a stay." So he's complaining that the Aristotelian physics that came down through the age wasn't really a very good match with the real world as people in Bacon's century knew it. How are we going to solve this problem? Well, more Bacon. In the mechanical arts, we do not find it so. They, on the contrary, as having in them some breath of life, are continually growing and becoming more perfect. As originally invented, they are commonly rude, clumsy, and shapeless. Afterwards, they acquire new powers and more commodious arrangements and constructions. Philosophy and the intellectual sciences, on the contrary, stand like statues. So what's Bacon saying? He's saying we've got it backwards. The father of science, Bacon, suggests that science must learn from the example of mechanical arts, or what we would today call engineering. Engineering is not just applied science. It would be more accurate and perhaps equally haughty to say that science is merely engineering concepts applied to the invention of concepts themselves. So over the years, there's been something of a historical inversion where science has become the master and engineering has become the slave. Let's now turn to business and turn to one of the great historians of commerce, Alfred Chandler. Chandler's terrific book, The Visible Hand, The Managerial Revolution in American Business, he writes the following. Of the new forms of transportation, the railroads were the most numerous, their activities the most complex, and their influence the most pervasive. They were the pioneers in the management of modern business enterprise. So he's talking about the situation in the 19th century where the railroads were forming and observing how complex they were relative to other businesses of the time. And who invented these complex businesses of the mid-19th century? The men who managed these enterprises became the first group of modern business administrators in the United States. The men who faced these challenges were a new type of businessman. The pioneers of modern management were all trained civil engineers with experience in railroad construction and bridge building before they took over the management of the roads. And so, interestingly enough, we've got another historical inversion. Modern business, as we know it, is in many ways an engineering invention. So it's not accurate to say that engineering is a capitalist tool. It'd be more accurate to say is that business is merely or just the application of engineering principles to commerce. And so with this proper history, this proper view of history, we can take sort of bilateral pride on both the science side and the business side of engineering to recognize that engineers played important roles in the formation of these two things that seem to have taken over. But from here, we want to ask about the joy side of this chapter. Are we really passionate about being engineers? Now, even here, too, we sort of get confused from time to time, and I think the usual view is to think of the engineer as the quintessential rational person. What, the ideal engineer is as emotionless as Mr. Spock of the television series Star Trek. Now, of course, Mr. Spock was a really smart guy. He was the chief science officer of the Enterprise. He could reason like a charm, and he could play 3D chess to beat the band. But what was his weakness? Well, in the television series, Captain Kirk was far better strategist, and Scotty, the engineer, was a far better problem solver. But the real problem was that Spock's emotionlessness left him unable to judge in situations of crisis or unusual situation where reason was of no avail. And so the important thing to keep in mind here is that the emotions were once ignored and in the Western tradition were set aside almost, but now they are the subject of intense scrutiny by biologists, philosophers, psychologists, and organizational behavior specialists. The key thing to think of here is that these emotions are the source of our ability to choose. They're the wellspring of our values, and they're interlaced with our reflective, rational minds. Now, nobody's arguing that our emotions should run amok, but we should not deny their importance. Now, what does this mean in practice? This means that the career choices, that when we make career choices, it's often a good idea to choose to do things that we enjoy passionately. And how do you know that? Well, there's a good test. Choose things for which time flies when you're having fun. What things make time fly for you? And see if you can match those things either directly or indirectly to your choice of a career. And in that way, you'll have what we might call a vocational impedance match. Just as in a circuit, you want to match the speaker to the amplifier. You want an 8-ohm speaker with an 8-ohm amplifier. You'd like to have a match in your life of things that help you find engagement that are emotionally well suited to who you are. And there are plenty of places to do this. Here we're referring to Martin Seligman's book, Authentic Happiness. So the bottom line is that engineering is a balanced education and a creative profession. We've taken some pride in the engineer's forgotten role in the creation of both science and business. And we've talked a little bit about how a happy, successful career can follow if we match our emotions and our passions to what we do in our career.